Today I'm gonna upgrade the world's cheapest mechanical keyboard because I want to see if we can turn this crappy keyboard into something that feels, looks and sounds more like this. Here's what we will need. Step 1 is to make a silicone mold. The keyboard sounds very hollow and plasticky, which isn't what we want. Our goal is to achieve that nice, creamy and deep Thocky sound profile, and adding the silicone mold will help us achieve that. Making the mold was quite easy. I simply had to take apart the keyboard and tape any holes in the case where the silicone could leak through. After that, I mixed the silicone for 5 minutes and poured it in. It will take a while for the silicone to cure, so in the meantime we can move on to the next step. By the way, that was just one out of the 5 mods that will take this keyboard to the next level. The second mod is to upgrade their stock red switches because they are absolute trash. But the thing is that this keyboard has a soldered PCB, which is understandable at this price, but it meant that I had to desolder each switch individually, which was fun until it wasn't. Anyways, I replaced the stock switches with some Kinetic Labs Husky switches. They are good, affordable, in-stock linear switches, so it will be a solid upgrade from what we had. But we have to lube them to get them to sound their best. So I grabbed 62 switches, just the right amount for this 60% keyboard, and started opening them up to lube them. Once they were all opened, I lubed all the springs at once by putting them all together inside a plastic bag with Krytox 105 oil. And I lubed the bottom housings and stems of every switch with Krytox 205 grade 0. And for some reason I found this clip really funny. All the switches are lubed, but there are 2 other mods we need to do before soldering them onto the PCB. One of them is to fix the incredibly rattly stabilizers. This is the trickiest part to get right, and the most noticeable if done poorly. The keyboard will sound like The stabilizer wires are completely dry and they are very loosely installed, which is why the stabs sound so incredibly rattly. To fix this, I did the following. The first thing I did was to cut out some band-aids and stick them where the stabs go on the PCB to reduce the noise coming from bottoming out the stabilizers. Then I clipped the plastic legs on each stem that prevented them from evenly bottoming out, which negatively affects the sound. After that, I lubed each stem and stabilizer housing with Krytox 205 grade 0, and I grabbed my tube of dielectric grease to apply a generous amount to the wire to remove the rattle. I also stuck some band-aids on the plate to secure the stabilizers in place because that also contributed to the rattle. After these simple mods, it went from sounding like this to this. I can't wait to show you the final result. The fourth mod will make the keyboard sound extremely nice. Here's what I did. I cut out a piece of the packaging foam that came in the box, cut it to the size of the PCB, made all the cutouts for the stabilizers and standoffs, and installed it in between the switches and the PCB. Next, I cut some foam strips I had laying around and stuck them on the steel plate to make the keyboard sound deeper and compensate for the stiff steel plate, which often results in a higher pitch sound. The added PE foam and plate foam will make a keyboard sound way better, especially a lower end pre-built like this one. Let's check how the silicone is doing. It's almost there, and we are almost done. It's time to solder the new switches, but there's just one problem. The Husky switches are 5-pin and the PCB only supports 3-pin switches, so I had to cut every single plastic pin on each of the 62 switches. Once that was done, I installed all the switches and soldered everything back together. And I didn't burn my finger this time. There's just one more upgrade to do before we can put everything back together. Well, actually 2. The first one is the tape mod. All I had to do was cut some tape to length and cover the bottom of the PCB. This easy mod will reduce the plasticky case sound and you will see the difference once we put everything back together. I started reassembling the keyboard, but there was one problem. The keyboard wasn't fitting in the case for some reason. After a good hour or so of not knowing why it wasn't fitting in properly, I found out why. Here are the mistakes I made so you don't make these same mistakes. Number 1. I completely forgot that the case is slightly angled, so I had to slightly elevate the lower part of the case when letting the silicone cure to avoid having too much silicone on the bottom part, which is exactly what happened. This interfered with the PCB, so it wasn't fitting in properly. Number 2. The screw stand stripped and somehow broke. So that's why the screw wasn't going in. I guess you get what you pay for. Knowing that, I had to cut the bottom half of the silicone and replace it with some foam to be able to install the PCB, which was kinda painful, but yeah, I had to do it. Also, I got really annoyed by the tiny included screws, so I just replaced them with some thick computer screws and forced them in. I call it the screw it mode. Okay, I think it's in. I don't ever plan to mod this keyboard ever again, so it's fine. Time for the keycaps.
GMK Bento.
I used my GMK Bento set for this because it's the only set I had that supported this layout. The Amazon listing showed a standard ANSI layout in the pictures, but I received a Spanish ISO layout, which is understandable since I live in Spain, but it does bother me because now I can't use the keycaps I originally bought for this build, as it doesn't have the necessary keycaps to support this layout. Anyways, here's the final result.